right, let's go ahead and tackle a really important question to understand before we get too deep into understanding how to do a bunch of conjugation. And I know that word doesn't make sense to you yet, but we'll get there. But what is a verb? It's a pretty simple question, and you probably think you already know the answer to it, and you probably already do know the answer because the very basic answer is a verb is any action. Anything that we do, that is a verb. So run, jump, play, sing, dance, talk, teach, listen. All of those things are actions. Even if you don't necessarily think of it as an action, like hear, you hear something, you're not actively doing something, but it's still going on. It's still an action that is happening, even if it's happening kind of to you. Like you can hear something or not hear something, so it is considered an action. So let's just talk about what these verbs are and how they look when you see them. So there are three types of verbs in Spanish. There are AR, ER, and IR verbs. And I think it's fairly obvious when you look at it, but when you have a verb that ends in AR or a word that ends in ER, or a word that ends in IR, those are verbs and they are AR, ER, or IR based on what that ending is. So our first example here, hablar, it ends in an AR, and that tells me that that is an AR verb. There are many of these different types of verbs, so it's not there's just these three verbs, but there are three types of verbs. And then there's also reflexives, but we're not going to get into that right now. We're just going to talk about these very simple AR, ER, IR verb. If it ends in an AR, an ER, or an IR, it is a verb, and it will need to be conjugated. So let's talk about that for a very split second, because the very next thing you're going to watch and I'm going to discuss with you is conjugation and unconjugation. But the very basic thing you need to know here is that in English, an unconjugated verb has to in front of it. To run, to jump, to sing. All of those are unconjugated verb. There's no subject attached to it. In Spanish, it means that you have the AR, ER, or IR still on the end there. It means that there's not an quote-unquote ending on those verbs. It's AR, ER, or IR still on there. That means it is unconjugated. And again, the very next class, this very next lesson, is going to be completely devoted to conjugation and unconjugation and how to recognize each of those and how to do each of them. So our basic understanding here is we conjugate the verb to say the tense, past, present, future, etc., as well as who is doing the action, who that subject is, who the person is that is directly doing that action. So that sums up our Spanish verbs. So a verb is an action. There are three types of Spanish verbs, AR, ER, and IR, and they can be conjugated, which leads us into our very next lesson. What is conjugation?